Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Econobox garage. With the weather forecast calling for temperatures in the high 30 degrees Celsius range, I've decided I'm not going to do anything in the garage that's going to add any heat, so therefore I'm not going to do any welding. Instead, I'm going to finish up assembling the rear axle. So that means adding the hard lines for the brakes, adding the brake backing plates, bearings, and all of that kind of stuff. So thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoy this week's video. One of the things I like to get done in this video is to get the rear axle reassembled. So that means assembling the brakes. There's the brake backing plates that I've painted up. All the brake hardware is being cleaned up. I have new slave cylinders for both wheels, new shoes for both wheels, and new drums for both sides. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to assemble the brakes onto the backing plates. I will then attach the assembled backing plates to the axle, and then once those are on, I can reinstall the hubs. Now I've got the gasket and the seal that goes with those. I'll go into more detail on that, of course, when we get to that stage. I've also got new plugs for the brake drums, so that just goes in the hole here, and this hole allows access to the adjustment screw. One thing I've learned on the backing plates is it's not a great idea to paint this part here. Reason for that is that the wheel cylinder needs to be able to slide up and down that just a little bit, and this surface here rests on this part here, and then the underside of the tabs here and here overlap on the back side. So what I'm going to have to do is scrape all the paint off here, sand that down. This is the backing plate for the left-hand side. I've already done the right, so that's how I discovered this. I also discovered that on these wheel cylinders, let's just set that there, this surface here is not finished off, it's just bare casting. So what I had to do on the other one is just take a file and level these out. And I think if I come around this way, you can see where the file has hit, and so that surface isn't flat. So I'm just using a little file to do that. I still have a bit more work to do on that. So for now, I'm just going to get going on sanding all of the paint off around here and on each side here where those tabs come through. And on this plate here, I'm going to have to be a little more careful because it's actually got bent a little bit. But but I'm fairly confident that's not going to cause an issue. Okay, well now I've got this so it'll slide into place, and if you notice here, it pops out. I've got these two surfaces here filed down, they're pretty flat, and the paint is all off on each side here and on those sides there. Now this is the backing plate for the left-hand side of the car, and the rule with these ones is this lever points in the direction of the rotation of the wheel. So the wheel would be here, forward, it's going that way, So this lever here points upwards into there. That just slots in and clips down. Now when I put this all together, I'll put a little bit of lube on each of those sides in here and here, and on the tabs on both sides here. So next up is to fit the brake shoes and the springs. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some brake lubricant on a couple of the sliding points. It's easier to do it before everything is on. So I'll just put a little bit here and a bit on that side and along where the brake cylinder runs there. So don't want to put too much on, obviously, with it being the brakes. Put the brake cylinder in. One of the things that needs to go on there too is the brake adjuster. I'll just put some lube on that. Again, not too much. And put that in there. Should put a little bit on those on the sides here. So that's the adjuster, and you can see as you turn it, it moves up in that little bracket. So you want to leave it that it's down at its bare minimum. And then that clips in right over here. And we'll see how this all works in a minute here. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to put this shoe in. There's two different shoes. One has a notch in here, the other doesn't. This notch clips into the adjuster, so I'll just put that little bit of grease in there. That clips into that in there, like so. Now the springs themselves go between the backing plate and the drum, and the shoes. So they don't go sitting on top like that. They go underneath. Actually, this one goes up here. So I'll get that one in place there. And so the heavier looking spring goes on the bottom holes, like that. And I'm just going to wrench that one in. Put this into place here. And obviously you want to make sure that this screw is pointing up, otherwise you're not going to be able to access it to adjust it later. So I'll put that on there. And this one clips in there and there. And I'm just going to bring this one over. See, both of these ends here are in. Oops, got that spring stuck under there. And this upper spring goes underneath and hooks into that hole there. And we'll go on this one as well. Now I've chosen to do it this way because there's not much of a slot to get in there, so it's going to be easier to stretch this out. And if you stretch it out on this top spring rather than the bottom one, this one is not quite as powerful as the bottom one here. So let's give that a push onto the there. You can see everything is nice and seated. The bottom well, it's bottom relative now. This actually mounts on the car like that. The spring you can see is between the shoes and the backing plate, and the same with this one up here close to the cylinder. Now that those are on, the next thing to do is to put on these little beehive clips, and you can see the little hook here. There's a tab, I should have shown you earlier, but there's a tab on the backing plate that just hooks under after going through goes through the shoe and clips onto that, and this spring helps hold that shoe into place. Some of them go in and really nice and easy. Others take a little bit of encouragement. Let's see what happens here. Okay, got it this time. I'll just push it with the screwdriver. And there we go. So there we have it. That is the left-hand side brake assembly all together. I'll just show you how I use the drum to center the whole assembly on the backing plate to make it easier to put together later. I have a new brake drum here. There's my assembled backing plate. Now these shoes are a little bit free to slide up and down, so they don't necessarily line up right away. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this in here and see which way I have to move which shoe to get it to fit properly. So this one just has to move down a bit. And that one is pretty close to being centered, and I think we'll be happy with that one there. So that worked out quite nicely. So now I know that that is basically centered on the backing plate. It'll make it easier to put things together when the time comes for that. One thing I am going to do, suggested in a couple of places, is I'm going to paint the top of this adjusting screw white. The reason for that is it makes it a whole easier to see through the hole in the brake drum here when it comes time to adjust the brakes. So here are both the backing plates. This is the one for the left-hand side, and this is the one for the right-hand side. So the next step is to bolt these to the respective ends of the rear axle. And then once that's bolted on, I can start work on getting the rear hubs installed and rear axles. I now have the right-hand side completed, and just a couple of tips on here. Between the axle shaft and the hub, there's that O-ring and paper gasket, and you saw me put some sealant on there. And there's 3 screws that secure those two together. One goes in before the brake drum goes on, you can see that here. And then these other two go through, and then those have to be removed when you pull the brake drum. I've tightened these 3 screws as much as I can initially. Then I've gone and put the lug nuts on, so essentially I can clamp the end of the axle shaft to the hub using the brake drum and these lug nuts. And once those were tight, I went in and re-tightened up these screws, and I'll leave that there for a few days. Actually, I'll probably leave that on there for until I put the axle on the car, and that way the gaskets can seal up and won't get disturbed, with the intent of having no leaks of gear oil from the axle housing itself. Next on the agenda is to replace the old brake lines, which I've just kind of set in place here, just to give you an idea of what I'm working on. This is the original union block that I've cleaned up, and it's just sitting there loose. Now I'll tighten that up once we've got the lines all done. I've cleaned up the old fitting here, put a new bleed screw on it and new copper washers on both sides. That again is just mounted loosely until we get all the brake lines in place. One thing I'm going to attempt is to remove these little straps from the old brake line so I can reuse them. They'll need to get cleaned up and what have you. There's one on this side and one on the other. Now, if you recall from an earlier video, I labeled these with these letters, F on that side, E on that side, and that line marks up the new pieces here, which came just rolled up. That's letter E for this side, and that's F, and that'll replace this line here. And these came pre-made with the correct fittings. I've clamped one end of the strap into the vise here, and I'm going to straighten out the tail of this as best I can, and it basically goes through a little slot in here. So once I get that opened up enough, I'll just slide the pipe off and then work with it from there. I realized as I was working on this, I don't need to get this completely through the little slot here. I just need to make this loop here big enough to slide out the fitting. Then I can put this on the new brake line. I'm going to clean this up, of course, so it looks nice. I'll get the other little strap off the other side, get them both cleaned up, and then we're ready to start bending some pipe. So another advantage of not tightening everything up right away is that I wasn't 100% sure that I had this fitting here with the bleed screw in the right orientation. So I went back and checked on my own video when I took this apart, and also checked another couple of videos on similar projects, and it turns out that I do in fact have those in the wrong way. The bleeder valve should actually point towards the back of the car. So I'll undo those, flip them around, and then I can tighten everything up. Alright, I've got these fittings flipped around, everything's tightened up. Next up is to get the parking brake actuators in place. So that bolts on to this little bracket here and hooks up to the arms on the wheel cylinders. So there we have the entire rear axle put back together and essentially ready to go back in the car. So I've got the hard brake lines run and all tightened up, and I've got the parking brake actuator rods in place. I got the bracket with the compensator, and there's the one going over to the left-hand side of the car. And that's all got cotter pins in where it's supposed to. Yeah, so I'm very happy with the progress this week. As I said, this is just about ready to go back in the car. The brake hose, or the soft line that comes from the body, attaches to this connection here, and the e-brake or parking brake cable attaches to the front of this bracket under here, and then comes through this hole, and there's a clevis that goes along here with the appropriate pin. So there we go. One Bugeye or Frogeye rear axle ready to go back in the car. Well, that wraps it up for this week. Thanks for joining me. Please be sure to like, leave a comment, hit the subscribe button and that little bell icon so you'll get notified when the next videos come out. Next week, the forecast calls for cooler temperatures, so I'll get back to the welding on the back of the car. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.